Ever had a favorite game? A game that you just couldn't put down? A game that just had to be finished? Well, my friend Steve and I were hanging out one day. This is back when we were younger, 10 or 11, I believe. Anyway, we had just saved up quite a bit of money from our allowances and doing odd jobs like mowing the neighbor's lawn and whatnot. And finally, we had enough to each get a Game Boy Advanced and one game apiece. Steve was so excited, and he was practically jumping with joy, in a literal sense. We entered the game store, and all over the shelves were hundreds of games for a bunch of consoles. I turned to look for my friend, and I saw him talking to a store employee. The employee nodded and then walked away from him. Steve strolled casually towards me with a wicked grin on his face. "Hey man, guess what?" he said. "Let me guess, I don't have any Pokemon games," I responded, slightly bummed. "Actually, they only have one game left," he said in an eager tone. "Here's what I'm thinking. We pool our money together, and I borrow the game for a week, and then you can borrow the game." I was reluctant to agree to this, but then again, we were best friends, so I accepted and remained happy that I was still going to get to enjoy the game. The clerk came back and stood in the doorway just staring at Steve. Steve walked over and handed him a $20 bill, put something in his pocket, and then walked out of the store with a smile. The clerk went back to stocking the shelves, and I completely forgot that I was standing there. Well, I left and I went home. After the first night, I'll be honest, I really wanted to play that game. But then I didn't think I could wait it out. I mean, he would want me to give him some time to play it. So I continued about my day. Well, a few days go by, and I decided to call Steve to see what he was up to. And there was no answer. I thought maybe he wasn't home, maybe his family went out or something. On the 6th day, I saw a television report about a boy who had gone missing. The picture was of Steve. I rushed over to his house and found that his parents were sobbing outside. Johnny?" his mother asked. "Hey, are you okay?" "The only thing he left was this," she said in a mournful voice as she passed me a piece of paper. It was a note, written in dark red ink. It read, "Game over." "I don't understand what that means," his mother cried. "Do you mind if I go check his room?" I asked, rather determined. I had a feeling I knew what he meant by the note. "Sure," she whispered, almost hopeless. I ran into his house and headed for his room. The strange thing was that nothing looked out of the place. He had his old wooden desk, and under a couple of comic books, I saw the corner of what appeared to be a game cartridge. Picking it up and looking at it, it was certainly creepy. It wasn't the normal type of Pokemon game. This case was a deep red, and the picture on the front was a Pikachu. I didn't have much time to inspect the cartridge, so I tucked it away in my pocket and walked out of the room. Leaving my friend's house, I tried to think of where he could have gone, but nothing came to mind. I ended up getting home at around 6 p.m., and after I took off my jacket, the game fell out of my pocket and struck the ground. It made me take a bit of a step back. The cartridge was lying face down. I stopped for a moment and then realized that this Pokemon game was probably the last thing Steve even did before he went missing. I picked up the game and examined the label. It had a picture of what appeared to be Pikachu on the front. At least I thought it was Pikachu, though it looked to be black with piercing red eyes. I grabbed the Game Boy and put the game into the slot. Pausing for a moment, I flicked the power button on, and nothing happened. This is weird. I had just put brand new batteries in the thing. Well, I opened up some in my drawer and I found a new pack of batteries that had only 2 left. My lucky day. I immediately popped out the old batteries and placed the new ones in. I hit the power button again, and again, nothing happened. "This is stupid," I thought to myself before placing the game on my desk. After about an hour and a half or so of watching TV, I was really mad that I couldn't get to play the game. "Johnny, your father and I are going out. You be good, we'll be back soon," my mother said before closing the front door behind her. I watched them drive away in the rain. I continued to watch TV, simply because there really wasn't anything else for me to do. It was raining, getting dark, and still that damn game wouldn't work. I stormed to my room in a rage, annoyed yet determined to find out the cause behind why my game wouldn't work. I closed the door behind me, and the only light illuminating me was a small nightlight I had. I mean, I wasn't scared of the dark or anything. The light was a skull, and it shadowed the skull on the wall. When I looked over at the desk, though, it looked like the Game Boy was on. I picked it up immediately and it shut itself off. The screen went white and nothing happened. I sat there for a moment, just examining the whole system before a loud screech came from the game, so loud that I let out a scream. After a moment to compose myself, I watched the screen flicker from black to white. Game Boy flashed across the black screen in a crimson color. I had never seen the Game Boy start up in that way. The game began with the intro. You know, the one with the Pokemon League battles? The first trainer called a Charizard, though, but the image was realistic, like a real-life dragon. When it showed the strong-willed Pokemon, its trainer could be seen in the background. It was Gary Oak. He looked to be crying, constantly weeping, not paying attention to the Charizard that he had just called. Then the screen flickered. A shadowy figure was standing on a platform towards Gary. The only way I knew it was a person was the thin gray outline of his body. The opposite threw a black Pokeball in front of the fire dragon. A Squirtle appeared. This Squirtle, however, had a black turtle shell with what appeared to be gashes on it. It also had those sunglasses from the TV show as well.
Squirtle used sludge. It struck Charizard's tail. It was super effective. Charizard has died.
Then the screen flickered once more. The original Pokemon logo appeared, and then the words Blood Edition in red appeared underneath before the menu screen popped up. How is this a kid's game, I wondered, but for some reason I just sat there staring at the menu screen. There was only one option to select. It was continue. I tapped A and the save file popped up. There was only one file. A trainer with 6 Pokemon, and this time it was played was 99 hours, 99 minutes, and 99 seconds. But the strangest thing about this file was the trainer's name. It wasn't Ash or Red or even Steve. The name was Johnny. That's my name. Hesitantly, I pressed A and selected the file. The game screeched once more, and an image of my sprite was shown, standing on the edge of a virtual cliff. Before making any moves, I checked the stats of my characters. I actually had a pretty solid group. It pretty much mimicked Ash's Pokemon. Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, Butterfree, Pidgeotto, and the last Pokeball was blacked out. I just assumed the Pokemon had fainted and was unusable. Well, that and because the other Pokemons had very low health, pretty much 10 hit points apiece. I checked my character's stats, and there was an image of my sprite that was supposed to be. It was just a blacked out image. I shrugged it off, and closed out and began to walk. I was on what appeared to be a cliff of Mount Moon. There was something wrong. It looked like bones were scattered all over my sprite. I walked to what appeared to be the cave entrance into the mountain. Upon walking into the darkness, my sprite was knocked back to the cliff, and a sprite resembling Professor Oak had walked out. I walked up to him and pressed A, though when I did, his dialogue box showed up.
Oh, Gary. Why didn't you listen to me? You were the best. But you were too stubborn.
The professor had stopped at the far end of the cliff. I slowly walked up to him and once more, and I tapped A.
Only a Pokemon Master can control them.
His sprite said this before walking off the cliff. The game then flickered as if reacting to something hitting the ground. Then a huge, high-pitched screech noise played. Did I just witness a person committing suicide? In the game? I swallowed my fear and headed back to the entrance of the cave. I entered as it was pitch black all around me. My sprite continued into the darkness. I was just trying to get out of this mountain. As I walked, a dialogue box came up.
Gee, it sure is dark in here.
Battle music instantly started playing. I was startled for a moment. The dialogue box then returned.
Surrender now, or prepare to fight. Trainer James has chosen wheezing. Jessie didn't listen. She was too stubborn.
After seeing the wheezing, I had noticed that its HP was at 5, and the image of the Pokemon was completely blacked out inside from its eyes with white X's on its body. I chose Charmander.
Wheezing used suffocation. Wheezing has died. Charmander has died.
What the hell? I've never heard of a Pokemon technique called that before. I wasn't really too mad though. I had 4 more unusable Pokemon left and James only had the 1. After our battle, the sprite of James just sat there in the same spot as before. I tapped A and his dialogue box flickered.
Only a Pokemon master can control them.
His sprite then fell over on a shadowy ground into the mountain.
Team Rocket trainer James has died.
At this point, 2 people had already died. I was terrified. I didn't really feel like playing the game anymore. I mean, it was just making me sick. I checked my inventory and I only had a single revive, and when I tried to select it, I got a response that simply said, "It's too soon to use this now." So I pressed on. There had only been a reason why this file was left at Mount Moon.
Gee, it sure is dark in here.
I came across a ladder, ascending it to the top level of the mountain cave. It was a bit more visible than the lower levels. The area was lined with gravestones, almost like Lavender Town. A sprite facing away from me was standing before a gravestone. He was crying.
Why did you take my best friend?
The sprite asked. The battle music started playing and my opponent appeared. It was the depiction of Ash, though he looked savagely beaten. His eyes were missing, and so was chunks of his flesh.
Trainer Ash chose Haunter.
I decided to choose Squirtle. This Haunter was strange. It appeared to be white instead of the normal black. The Haunter also had only 5 hit points on him.
Haunter used fear.
The screen flickered a couple of times and a painful cry echoed from the speakers. When the screen returned, it was completely and utterly black.
Squirtle has died.
The game prompted me to choose another Pokemon. Well, I had no psychic Pokemon to battle a ghost, so I figured this was the ending of the game. I ultimately choose Butterfree as my Pokemon character.
Butterfree is too scared to move. Hunter used Torment.
Once again, the screen flickered, and the sound of unrelenting pain shrieked through the speakers once more.
Butterfree has died.
I began to feel sad. All these Pokemon were just dying, and I couldn't stop any of it.
Hunter has ran away.
Confused, I tapped the A button and the sprite of the boy in front of me had vanished. At this point, I had only 2 Pokemon left, Bulbasaur and Pidgeotto. The only way out of this horrific place seemed to be the ladder in the corner of the room. There was a sign posted next to the ladder. It read,
Only a Pokemon master can control them.
I climbed the ladder and the ladder was on, and I appeared to be at the peak of the mountain. The snow was heavy and the screen was dimly lit. After a few steps, my sprite collapsed.
It's hard to breathe up. It's hard to breathe up here.
The screen flickered once more, and I could have sworn that I saw a skull flash across the screen. When the game returned to normal, there was a sprite standing directly in front of mine. It was a shadow. The shadow said one thing, and only one thing.
I am a Pokemon master.
The screen began flashing red and black with a twisted version of the battle music playing. The shadow chose Squirtle, though this Pokemon looked different. The shell was black and it was wearing the blackened sunglasses. But the strangest thing about this Pokemon was its skin. It wasn't its usual aqua blue. The skin was red and looked to be dripping with blood. A Squirtle is still a Squirtle, though, I thought to myself, and I selected Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur used Vine Whip. Bulbasaur used Vine Whip. The master laughed at my attempts to overcome his little water Pokemon. Squirtle used Acid. I could still hear the screams of my Bulbasaur. The image of my Pokemon was replaced by a rotten corpse that had been eaten away, all the way down to the very bone. Bulbasaur has died. Fearful of sending out my final Pokemon, reluctantly I sent out Pidgeotto. The master chose Charizard as his final Pokemon. I knew it was only a matter of time before I lost the game. His Charizard had black skin, with patches of red. It was missing half of its wings. What scared me the most was its eyes. It didn't even have any. It just had black sockets for them. Pidgeotto used Wing Attack. Charizard was unaffected. Charizard used Flamethrower. My Pidgeot fell from the sky and was burning alive. Its cries of pain rung throughout my own house. The game grew silent. I had lost. But why was that shadow trainer still on the screen? The dialogue box appeared. Are you a Pokemon Master? An option appeared. Yes or no. I paused for a moment. This possibly had to be the worst choice in my entire life. I just stared at the options. But I lost. A Pokemon Master wouldn't lose. Then I began to wonder, maybe this was a second chance. I selected yes, and an eerie sound began to play. It was honestly twisted. My inventory opened, and the revive was selected. I chose to revive the unknown Pokemon I had from the beginning. I finally knew what my 6th Pokemon was. It was a Pikachu, the electric mouse Pokemon. The little Pokemon was the only thing standing between me and pure, utter terror. Finally, a battle of masters. As the trainer spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. Then he sent out his final Pokemon. It too was a Pikachu, though his looked grotesque. The tail had bite marks, and its body looked to be rotting away. The eyes were lifeless and white, and it was staring at me. Not just in the game, but it was staring at me as I focused it on the screen. Pikachu used Shock. The screen suddenly went black, as so did my nightlight. I was too scared to move. All I could do was just stare blankly at the screen. The screen flickered. Then I saw my Pikachu, though it looked to be badly beaten. It only had 1 HP left. My Pikachu, however, was holding an evil, warped Pokeball. Pikachu used Shadow Ball. Mine was swallowed up completely. As the ball rocked back and forth, shrieks of pain and fear resonated through my speakers. It was over. You are not a Pokemon Master. Well, the years have passed, and I haven't really told anyone about this game. Well, except for my psychiatrist. And I had completely forgotten about it. My son told me that he was going to be a Pokemon Master, just like Steve. I corrected him. You mean Ash, right? He shook his head. No, I mean Steve. And then he walked with a smile. And that, my little shadows, was Pokemon Blood Edition, a Pokemon Creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? While I personally did like the story, I will be honest and say that this story really hasn't aged very well. Let's start off with the positives of the story. For one, I love the fact that the author, who, Creepypasta Jr. was the one who wrote the story, congrats by the way, actually managed to make the gameplay itself into its own interesting story. I love the fact that the story itself didn't automatically go into gore category until later on in the story, and that it actually winds up building up tension and suspense until the very end of the game. Another thing as well, and this one should be a bit obvious by anyone on my channel, is the fact that the grammar was actually very, very good. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. Now on to the negatives of the story. My biggest complaint with the story so far is really the end of the game itself. The fact of the matter that it just ends right there. No, nothing. It was kind of like the whole, well, that was anticlimactic, and that could pretty much be this entire ending in of its own self. My biggest complaint as well is the fact that, I don't know, there's just no explanation, there's no further detail, there's really nothing. Also, the fact that the story just cuts to show the protagonist as an adult now really doesn't help blend the story together. In fact, it just kind of adds more of the questions that need to be answered in the story. Like, for example, what happened to the protagonist's friend? What happened, what did he do with the cartridge? There's a lot of questions that this story doesn't answer in the end, which would have really helped make the story a lot better. Sadly, though, that's not the case. Another issue I have with the story is that the fact that the story goes into a lot of cliches. Now, I will give the story the benefit of a doubt. This was written 6 years ago, and I think this is when, I think that's honestly when, cliches like that were still commonly being used, but it's still not really much of an excuse. Now, I will give it the shadow of a doubt and say that, it didn't have as many cliches. It had the hyper-realistic card, it had screaming, it had death, but that's close to about it. Overall, the story was good, but at the same time, it really could have been better. I rate this story a solid 8 out of 10. It's a good story, but like I said, it just didn't really age well. I hope you guys enjoyed this narration. What'd you guys think of my review? Do you agree with it or not? Also, what'd you guys think of the story? Did you enjoy it? What would you do to make this story better? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'm the Shadow Eater, and like always, roll the outro.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horror-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.